It was supposed to be a weekend reset. Just me, my gear, and the woods. I had driven out to Bald Eagle State Forest, north-central Pennsylvania. Not too far from home, but remote enough to get lost in if you weren't careful. I'd camped there a few times before, and it had always been peaceful. Maybe a little too quiet, but peaceful. I brought a lightweight tent, fire starter, basic rations, and a beat-up copy of the Mothman Prophecies to kill time. I was in between jobs, going stir-crazy, and I just needed space from the world. I should have trusted that first feeling when I pulled off the service road and saw the ranger station shuttered. I didn't think much of it. Maybe budget cuts. I parked my SUV at the usual lot, slung my pack over one shoulder, and started the long hike toward a clearing I'd used before. It was about 3 miles in, tucked between thick pine groves and an old, moss-covered stone outcrop that looked like a crumbled altar. I set up camp by late afternoon. Fire going, tarp staked, everything in order. The woods were dead quiet. I thought maybe it was just the cold front moving in animals get weird when the pressure drops. But it was that type of silence. Not peaceful, not natural. Like the trees were holding their breath. Around 9 p.m., I was wrapped in my sleeping bag, sipping lukewarm coffee from a metal cup, when I heard something. A click. That's the only way I can describe it. A deliberate click, like a tongue snapping against the roof of a mouth. It echoed across the clearing, bouncing between trunks. I turned off my headlamp and waited. Nothing, just wind. Maybe an animal, maybe branches. Then came another click, closer, followed by a long, slow inhale. Not mine. I sat up in the dark, heart already pounding, gripping the hunting knife I kept beside my sleeping pad. The fire had mostly burned down, leaving red coals. Everything was still. Then, crunch. Not like twigs under a deer. This was heavier, deliberate. I whispered into the dark. Who's there? Nothing, not even an echo. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the edge of the clearing. My beam caught something briefly low to the ground, like pale skin stretched over knobby joints. And then it was gone. I stayed up the rest of the night, blade in hand, back against the tent wall. By sunrise, I'd convinced myself it had been a dream or an animal I hadn't recognized. Sleep deprivation paranoia. I packed up fast, no breakfast, just shoved my gear into my pack and started the hike back out. Here's the thing. I couldn't find the trail. It should have been about 50 yards south, just past the tree shaped like a wishbone. But it wasn't there. I walked in the same direction for almost 15 minutes, thinking I must have veered off slightly. But the trail never came. That's when I found the trees. Carved into them were symbols, circles with diagonal lines overlapping X's, burned into the bark in some places, scratched in others. Not random, intentional. I stopped walking. My ears rang. There was no wind, no insects, no birds. That same suffocating silence. Then the smell hit me. Rot, like a wet animal carcass left out for days. I backed away, gagging, and that's when I saw the shape between the trees. It was hunched low to the ground, arms longer than its legs. Skin gray, hairless. Its face had no eyes, just black slits where the nose should be. and a mouth that stretched too wide across its face, split open in a grin that showed far too many teeth. It mimicked my last breath. That inhale I'd made seconds before it repeated it perfectly, mocking me. Then it moved. I ran. I don't know how long I ran. I know I cut my leg jumping over a fallen log, and at one point I dropped my pack. I didn't stop. Not until I hit the stream. I followed it downstream for what felt like hours until I found something unnatural. 2 stone pillars standing in the middle of the woods, covered in moss and symbols like the ones on the trees. Between them was a narrow path of pine needles perfectly cleared. No branches, no rocks. Just a clean trail leading deeper into the forest. I should have turned around, but I was delirious with fear, convinced it might lead me out. I walked that path for maybe 5 minutes before I saw it again. This time it wasn't crouching. It stood tall, over 7 feet, thin, emaciated, bones visible beneath stretched skin. Its mouth hung open, twitching. But it didn't attack. It pointed. Its arm raised, slowly, and pointed toward the trail behind me. Then it whispered, "Leave." Its voice sounded like it came from inside my head, layered over itself like a dozen voices speaking at once. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. This time I found the stream again, and when I followed it, I eventually emerged into the parking lot I'd left my SUV in. Only the sun was setting again. That hike should have taken 2 hours tops. Somehow I'd been out there for over 24. I drove home in silence, checking my mirrors every few minutes like I expected it to be in the back seat. But some reports go back over 200 years sightings of the smiling watcher in bald eagle. Always appears after dusk, always watches first, rarely speaks, almost never lets anyone go. I'm one of the lucky ones, I guess, but sometimes at night I still hear it. That click, that breath, and once, just once, found pine needles on my apartment floor. I don't have any plants, no trail gear inside, just a few dozen dry, dead needles in a perfect trail from the window to the bedroom door. I swept them up and tried to forget, but if you ever go hiking near Bald Eagle and the woods fall too quiet, listen. If you hear the click, it's already watching, and if it ever speaks, run. I've hiked all over the country, from the Sierra Nevadas to the remote corners of the Adirondacks, but there's one place I'll never return to, Bitterroot Ridge, deep in the Allegheny National Forest. I went there alone in late September of 2022. I was working on a photo series called Forgotten Trails Capturing Overgrown Paths, Moss-Covered Trail Markers, and wilderness areas that had been swallowed by time. I had a lead on an old hunter's trail that hadn't been maintained since the 1970s. Some forums said it was haunted. Others said it didn't exist. It exists. I arrived in the small town of Hemlock Falls late Friday afternoon. 1 diner, 1 gas station, and a few sagging houses lost in the trees. A ranger at the station warned me off going too far up the ridge, said storms had downed trees, and GPS barely worked out there. I lied and said I'd stay close. The first few miles were uneventful, peaceful, even. Cold air, golden leaves, the crunch of damp pine needles underfoot. I found faint trail blazes along birch trunks, faded and almost erased by time, but they led me deeper. I felt excited, like I was uncovering a piece of forgotten history. My camera captured deer tracks, old rusted traps, even a fallen hunting blind. By nightfall, I made camp in a clearing by a stream. That first night I heard humming. It started faint. I thought it was wind in the trees, or maybe a bear grumbling in the distance. But the tone was steady. It almost sounded like a woman's voice, low and rhythmic, like a lullaby. I stood outside my tent with my flashlight, scanning the woods. Nothing. No footprints, no animals. But the air smelled strange, wet, and metallic, like blood in a rainstorm. I barely slept. The next morning I woke up to find 4 smooth stones arranged in a circle just outside my tent flap. Small, river-washed. I hadn't seen them the night before. It freaked me out. I packed up fast and told myself I'd head back to the car. Only I couldn't find the trail. The blazes were gone, like the trees had moved. I spent the entire day walking, trying to retrace my steps. I found the same stream 3 separate times. At one point I passed a fallen log with a carving that read, "We drink light." I hadn't seen it before. The sun set too fast. The woods got colder. The silence got heavier. I heard the humming again, closer this time. No animals. Not even crickets. I set up camp in the most open space I could find and kept the fire going all night. At some point, I don't know when, I must have dozed off. I woke to wet breathing right beside my tent. Not animal breathing, human, but off. Too deep, gurgling. I froze. Then a slow dragging sound circled the tent, like bare feet moving through wet leaves. Something brushed against the fabric, a finger maybe, or a claw. Then you found us. It whispered from just beyond the tent wall. The voice was neither male nor female. Just wrong, flat, like it was mimicking language without understanding it. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just waited until the first light of dawn turned the tent a shade lighter. I unzipped it slowly. No one was there, but the stones were again, this time in a line pointing north, and I followed. I don't know why. Maybe I was panicking. Maybe it had taken something from me in the night, something deeper than sense. But I walked that line of stones, each spaced exactly 20 paces apart. After what felt like an hour, I found it, the circle. In a hollow beneath the ridge, hidden by twisted trees, was a perfect ring of standing stones 10 feet high, smoothed by weather, carved with faint spirals and symbols I didn't recognize. At the center was a depression in the ground, shallow, maybe 6 feet across, lined with moss and something that looked like old, cracked bone. I should have turned back. Instead, I stepped into the center. It was like the world dropped away. Silence. Deeper than anything I'd ever known. Even the air felt still. Then the humming started again. This time inside my head, vibrating behind my eyes. I saw flashes, images, faces, places I'd never been. A figure cloaked in black bark, pale hands reaching out of the ground, a sky filled with black crows, wings frozen mid-flap. Then the circle pulsed, and I dropped to my knees. When I came to, it was dark again. The fire in my camp was dead. My camera was missing, so was my compass. My boots were soaked, and my clothes were caked in mud. I had no memory of how I'd gotten back, but something had followed. I saw it once more before I made it out. It stood behind a tree about 40 feet away, tall, too thin, skin like stone. Its eyes glowed faintly. It didn't move, just watched, and in my mind I heard it again. "We drink light," I sprinted. I don't know how I got out, but I stumbled onto the side of the forest road, near where I'd parked. My SUV was covered in fallen leaves and had a layer of dew, like it had been sitting there for days. I had only been gone 2. Back in town, the ranger looked surprised to see me. Said the last few hikers who went up Bitter Root never came back. That was 1.5 years ago. I still haven't looked at the photos from that trip. I found my memory card jammed into a tree branch in my backyard 2 weeks after I returned home. Just there, sitting in the oak above my deck. My camera was still gone. I've heard the humming twice since. Always at night. Always around 3:33 a.m. Once I woke to find 4 smooth stones on my bedroom floor, arranged in a perfect circle. I've vacuumed them up. I don't go into the woods anymore, not even parks. I get nauseous near pine trees. I've canceled the Forgotten Trails project. That part of my life is over. If you ever find yourself near Bitter Root Ridge and the forest gets too quiet, don't follow the stones. Don't enter the circle. Because whatever they are, they don't forget the ones who step inside. My name's Caleb, and I'm not the type to scare easy. I've spent most of my life in the woods. My dad was a forestry surveyor in northern Vermont, and I followed in his footsteps. I know how the forest moves, how it breathes. I've walked through deep snow and fog so thick it choked the light, heard the distant howls of coyotes in places with no name. I know what it's like to feel truly alone. But until last fall, I didn't know what it was like to feel watched. I was doing a personal solo hike along the Grover Ridge Trail, an old fire road that cuts through about 15 miles of hardwood forest up near the Canadian border. The whole thing was spontaneous. I just left a contract job downstate and had a couple of free weeks before the next one started. No obligations, no clients, no emails. Just a pack, a tent, and a trail. I started off late in the afternoon, but I figured I'd make camp just a few miles in. It was October, and the days were shorter, which made the entire ridge blaze gold and red. I remember how the wind whispered through the birch trees as I crossed a small creek and found a decent flat stretch just off the trail. I set up camp, got a fire going, and cooked a quick meal. The first night was peaceful. Still air, rustling leaves, the occasional hoot from a barred owl. I slept well. It was the second day that changed everything. Around midday, I veered off the trail to follow a ridgeline I'd never seen before. The topographic map didn't show anything notable, but there was something about the slope that caught my eye. A narrow line of stones cut through the fallen leaves, following the incline like an old, forgotten path. It wasn't a maintained trail, just a series of flat, square stones maybe 2 feet wide, spaced evenly apart, leading up the ridge and into a denser patch of forest. I should have turned around, but curiosity overruled caution. I started up the slope, boots crunching the dry leaves. The stones were slick, covered in patches of moss and decay, but they were unmistakably placed. Too regular to be natural. They weren't granite or anything local either, more like shale, dark and fine-edged. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest grew. And I mean quiet, no birds, no insects. Just the sound of my breathing and the crunch of my boots. Even the wind had stopped. By the time I reached the top of the ridge, I realized I couldn't see the trail anymore. I looked back, but the stones didn't lead back the way I'd come. They just ended behind me in a scatter of roots and leaves. The path was gone. I stood there a minute, trying to wrap my head around it. I knew the layout of the ridge. I had a GPS and a compass, but the coordinates weren't lining up with where I should have been. Then I smelled it, something metallic and damp, like rusted iron and rotting leaves. And then the whispering started. At first, it sounded like wind through dead branches, but there was no wind. I turned slowly, scanning the trees, and that's when I saw the figure. It was standing maybe 20 yards ahead, in the gloom beneath a cluster of dying maple trees, tall, unmoving, dressed in something long and tattered that blended with the bark and underbrush. Its face was obscured, but I could feel it staring at me. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't panic, not right away. I told myself I was tired, maybe dehydrated, that it was a shadow or my brain playing tricks on me. I took a drink, sat down on a fallen log, and checked my gear. The compass spun lazily, never settling. The GPS blinked back an error. Signal lost. That's when the unease set in. I'd seen malfunctions before, but this felt deliberate, like the forest itself didn't want me to leave. I stood up and tried to backtrack. I used the sun as best I could, estimating southwest toward the original trail, but no matter how far I walked, the terrain didn't change. The forest just kept repeating same ridges, same dead trees, same patchy canopy. At some point I came upon the stone path again. I swear I had been walking in a straight line for an hour, but there it was, those same dark stones trailing off through the brush like they had been waiting for me. I followed them again, thinking maybe they'd lead me out. Maybe they were some forgotten trail system, but they didn't lead out. They led me to the clearing. It was a perfect circle, about 30 feet wide, with a ring of flat black stones forming its boundary. Nothing grew inside, not even moss. The soil was gray and powdery, like ash. In the center was a single stone slab, like an altar, and carved into it was a spiral symbol that hurt to look at. I stepped forward, and the whispering surged, louder now, layered, like dozens of voices all speaking over one another. The air thickened, pressure building behind my ears. I dropped my pack and turned to run, and that's when I saw it again, closer this time, still and silent, watching me from beyond the stones. It didn't move like a living thing. It shifted, like smoke trapped in a human shape. No face, no features. just two hollow eye sockets that shimmered in the dim light. I didn't think. I ran. I don't remember how long or how far. The woods blurred around me. I tripped more than once, tore up my knees and elbows. But I didn't stop until I crashed down the slope and nearly stumbled into a familiar downed tree near the main trail. When I saw the marker, an old U.S. Forestry Service blaze, I almost cried. I camped near the trail that night, too scared to sleep. I kept the fire high and the compass close, but it didn't settle until long after midnight. I made it back to my car the next day. Since then, I've searched every public and private trail record in the region. There's no mention of a stone path or a clearing like the one I found. The coordinates I marked on the GPS don't exist, just blank spots on the map. I've talked to other hikers, even a few locals. Most shrug it off, but one older guy, he ran a bait shop near the edge of town, went real quiet when I mentioned the spiral on the stone. Some places aren't meant to be found, he said. You're lucky you made it back. I don't know what I found in that forest, or what found me, but I've never gone off trail since. Not once, because every now and then when I'm walking alone in the woods, I still hear that whisper on the wind, and I remember the stone path that shouldn't exist. My name's Evan. This happened 6 years ago, and even now, I still can't walk past an abandoned building without feeling a tightness in my chest. It was late October when my older brother Sam invited me to go deer hunting with him out in Clay County, Tennessee. We used to go every fall with our uncle, but after he passed, the tradition faded. That year, though, Sam had leased some land from a friend of his, a retired logger who still owned a couple hundred acres of forest bordering an old cattle farm. The land hadn't been maintained in years. No power, no running water, just forest, old fence lines, and some crumbling buildings from back when the farm was operational. Sam said it would be perfect, peaceful, undisturbed. A good place to set up camp for a long weekend. I was skeptical, but I missed spending time with him, so I agreed. We got there around noon on Friday. The access road was barely drivable, rutted dirt and broken tree limbs, but we managed to get my Tacoma close enough to hike the rest of the way in with our gear. The place was secluded, I'll give him that. Old maples towered over us, and you could walk for hours in any direction without seeing another soul. Near the edge of the tree line stood a long, rotted barn and a squat, rust-colored building with a blackened chimney. It was windowless, made of concrete blocks, with a heavy metal door that looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. Sam told me it used to be a smokehouse for meat, and he was thinking of turning it into a gear shed. That was our first mistake, disturbing it. We camped about 50 yards from the smokehouse. That first night was quiet. Crisp wind, the occasional crackle of the fire. Sam told stories about our uncle, and we drank warm whiskey and laughed more than I expected. But sometime after midnight I woke to a sound I couldn't place. Not an animal, not wind. It was a slow, deliberate creaking, like rusted hinges shifting under pressure. Then a soft metallic clang. It came from the direction of the smokehouse. I unzipped the tent, poked my head out. Sam was still asleep, snoring softly. The clearing was empty, no movement. But I swear, the smokehouse door was cracked open just a few inches. I closed the tent, chalked it up to a dream, and tried to fall back asleep. The next morning I asked Sam about it. He laughed. "Ghosts in the smokehouse, huh? Should have told me that before I picked this place." We walked over to the building after breakfast. The door was shut again, but I noticed a thick line of soot across the ground where the door met the concrete. Something had scraped it open recently. "Maybe an animal," Sam suggested. "Raccoons, maybe a bear looking for shelter." But I couldn't shake the feeling something wasn't right. We didn't hunt that day, just scouted and cut a few blinds for the next morning. As the sun started to go down, a thick fog rolled in, unnaturally fast. It crept through the trees and pooled in the clearing like smoke from a smoldering fire. I remember how still the air felt, like even the forest was holding its breath. That night I couldn't sleep. It wasn't just the fog or the silence, it was the smell. It drifted into our tent sometime after midnight. Not wood smoke, not the earthy scent of fall. It was sharp, chemical, like burnt hair and rotted meat. I tried to wake Sam, but he was out cold. I sat up, breathing shallow, staring toward the smokehouse. The fog was thicker now, glowing faintly in the moonlight. I could see something through it, a flickering orange light coming from inside the smokehouse. There were no windows, no way for light to shine through, but it was there, flickering like firelight, dancing on the fog. I made a mistake then. I got up. I left the tent and walked toward it. The smell grew stronger with every step, sickly sweet and wrong. My stomach churned. I reached the door, and against every ounce of reason I had, I pulled it open. The inside was pitch black, no fire, no glow, just the sound of my own breath echoing against the walls. Then I heard something move, a low, wet shuffle, like something dragging across concrete. I backed up fast, heart hammering in my chest. I slammed the door and ran back to the tent. Sam stirred as I climbed in. "Where the hell were you?" he mumbled. "Nowhere," I lied, "just checking something." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. In the morning, the fog was gone. The air smelled clean, normal. Sam cooked breakfast and talked about hitting a trail down by the ridge. I told him I was sick. He offered to stay, but I insisted he go. I needed to be alone to convince myself I wasn't losing my mind. But that afternoon, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The smokehouse door was open again, just slightly. I crept toward it, clutching a hatchet we kept for chopping wood. I didn't intend to go inside, but something compelled me. That same flickering, light, dim, orange pulsed from within. I opened the door and stepped in. The air was thick, damp. The smell returned instantly, burned meat, rot, ash. I raised a flashlight, scanning the interior. Hooks hung from the ceiling, rusted and old. Chains lined the back wall. Black scorch marks covered the floor, and in the corner I saw something wrong. It looked like a body, not fresh, not skeletal, somewhere in between, curled fetal against the wall, naked and gray. I stepped closer, hand shaking, and then it moved. Its chest rose barely. I stumbled backward, dropping the flashlight. The beam rolled across the room, and for a brief moment it lit the far wall, and I saw dozens of claw marks etched into the concrete. Deep gouges, like something had been trying to crawl out. I bolted, ran into the woods. Didn't stop until I saw Sam hiking back up the trail, confused and pale-faced. He'd seen the fog, too. He'd heard the whispers. We didn't spend another night. We'd packed and left that evening, driving until we hit the first town with cell service and a diner. We never told anyone. 2 weeks later, Sam sent me a link to a news article. That old logger, the one who owned the land, had gone missing. His family found his truck at the property line, keys still in the ignition, blood on the dash. They never found his body. That smokehouse, I don't know what it was. A place of death, maybe. A trap. Something older than the land, hiding in the concrete and ash. We should have never opened it, and I've never set foot in Clay County since. My name's Nathan. I work as a field geologist for a private surveying firm. Most of the time, my job is fairly routine, checking soil samples, documenting erosion patterns, mapping topography before developers come in and ruin everything. But in May of 2019, I was sent to a small town in rural Kentucky, near the edge of the Daniel Boone National Forest, and I still don't have the words for what I saw out there, only what I felt. And what I barely survived, it started with a call from a construction foreman, said a sinkhole had opened up unexpectedly at the edge of a new subdivision. They'd poured the foundation for a cul-de-sac, and the ground had collapsed overnight, swallowing half a backhoe and a pallet of cinder blocks. Thought it might be an old cave system, which isn't unusual in that part of the state. They wanted someone on site to evaluate the soil integrity and confirm whether it was safe to keep building. So I packed my truck, grabbed my tools, and drove 4 hours southeast. The neighborhood was mostly empty. A few houses framed out, one finished with a for sale sign in front, paint barely dry. The rest was nothing but cleared lots, brush piles, and orange construction fencing. When I arrived, the crew had already been pulled from the site. The hole was about 30 feet wide and maybe twice as deep. Fresh earth surrounded the rim, jagged and raw like the ground had been torn open. I remember thinking the shape was odd, too round, too clean, like something had bored its way up from below instead of caving in naturally. I set up a perimeter, took some initial readings, and started documenting the strata. The edges were strange. Layers of limestone and shale where there shouldn't have been. Fossils warped in the rock like they'd been stretched. I chalked it up to regional anomalies. You learn not to jump to conclusions in this line of work, but when I set up the seismometer, I noticed a vibration, subtle, rhythmic, like a faint pulse coming from beneath the earth. I figured maybe it was groundwater or a residual tremor from the collapse. I stayed on site as the sun started to dip. I'd planned to camp nearby, maybe sleep in my truck, finish the readings at dawn. I'd done it a dozen times before. But around 8:30 p.m., the wind died. Completely. Like someone flipped a switch. I looked up and realized how quiet it had gotten. No crickets, no birds, no frogs from the nearby creek, just a low, steady thrum from under the ground, almost like breathing. My gut told me to leave, to pack up and drive to the nearest motel, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I'd dealt with worse sights. Old mines, unstable cliffs, even one sinkhole filled with buried trash and a dead cow. I set up my tent on a nearby patch of stable rock and tried to sleep, but the sound kept me awake. It wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a scratching sound, faint, inconsistent, but unmistakable. It came from the sinkhole. I sat up in my sleeping bag, heart pounding, staring into the dark. The hole was about 50 feet away. My floodlights were still on, casting long shadows across the site. And then I saw it. A shape, something moving just below the rim. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the tent, my boots crunching gravel as I approached. I told myself it was an animal, a coyote maybe, or a fox. But as I got closer, I froze. There were fingerprints in the fresh soil, long, narrow impressions, like human hands, except the fingers were wrong, longer than any hand should be, and there were 6 of them. I turned, scanned the area, and that's when I saw the hole at the base of the sinkhole, like a tunnel had been carved into the side, perfectly round, maybe 3 feet across, leading into the dark. Then the scratching came again, louder this time, closer. I backed away, heart in my throat, and something peeked out. It was fast, just a flash, grayish skin, long face, and 2 bulbous black eyes that reflected the floodlight. Then it ducked back. I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't stop running until I hit the edge of the subdivision and reached my truck. I jumped in, locked the doors, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. They sent a deputy to check it out. Said they didn't find anything unusual, just some old fencing knocked down by a coyote, maybe. No signs of a break-in, no fresh tracks. Told me I probably saw a raccoon and scared myself into a frenzy. But here's the thing. When I went back the next morning to retrieve my gear, the hole was gone. Not the sinkhole, the tunnel, filled in, perfectly smoothed over, like it had never been there. The rim of the sinkhole was pristine, too pristine, like it had been repaired. My tent was still there, my gear, but the floodlights had been turned off, the wires neatly coiled beside them. And worst of all, the fingerprints were gone. But they'd been there. I know they had. One submitted my report. Advised them not to continue building. Said the ground was unstable, the layers inconsistent, possibly a collapsed underground chamber that could compromise the foundation. They ignored it. 6 months later, a house was built right over that spot. It's been resold twice. Owners never stay more than a year. I drove by once on a rainy afternoon last fall. The backyard had a small sinkhole, just a shallow depression in the grass. But there was a pattern to it, a circle, almost deliberate. I haven't been back since. Whatever crawled out of that hole, it wasn't natural. It wasn't meant to be found. And sometimes I wake in the middle of the night and swear I hear that scratching beneath the floorboards of my own home, like something burrowing slowly toward the surface, waiting. I've spent my entire life hiking the Appalachians. From my early teens, the forest has always been my place, more familiar than cities, more peaceful than anything man-made. I know the difference between a fox's cry and a bobcat's scream. I can tell when weather's about to shift just by the way the wind moves through the treetops. But nothing, not a lifetime out here, prepared me for what I found, or maybe what found me last fall under Hemlock Ridge. It started out as an ordinary 3-day solo, backpacking trip along a lesser-known trail that cut north through the Virginia Blue Ridge. I'd taken it before, years back, but the park had shut that section down after a series of rock slides made some switchbacks too dangerous. They hadn't reopened it since, but I knew the route and figured I'd be cautious. I left my truck near an old ranger station that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 90s. The first day was uneventful, if not beautiful. Cool air, leaves just starting to change, the kind of soft golden light that makes you feel like the woods are glowing from the inside. By sunset, I had my hammock strung between 2 old pines near a quiet creek. Nothing but the occasional chirp of tree frogs and the rustle of squirrels above. I ate a quick meal, took a few notes in my journal, and turned in early. That night, something woke me up. It wasn't a sound at first, more like a feeling, like a shift in the air. I lay there, perfectly still, every hair on my body standing on end. One thought maybe I'd imagined it, until I heard a slow, deliberate step, dry leaves crunching underfoot. One step, then silence. I stayed frozen in the hammock, my eyes wide open, but useless in the darkness. Whatever it was didn't move again. Not for a while. But I couldn't sleep. I just lay there, waiting, listening. The night stretched out like a rubber band ready to snap. Eventually, exhaustion pulled me under. The next morning, I convinced myself it was just a deer, maybe a black bear that caught my scent and lost interest. I told myself all the usual lies solo hikers tell themselves to keep sane, but then I noticed something. A single footprint about 30 feet from my campsite. Not a bear print, not a boot, barefoot, human. It was narrow and long, and the toes were weirdly splayed, like someone who hadn't worn shoes in years. It looked deep, too deep for someone as light as me. I kept moving faster than I normally would. Tried to convince myself it was just a hiker, someone else ignoring the closed trail signs. Maybe even a prank, maybe. I was pushing toward Hemlock Ridge when I found the hollow. I hadn't seen it on any maps or remembered it from before, but there it was, a sudden dip in the forest floor that dropped into a shallow, bowl-shaped depression, maybe 50 feet across, surrounded by tight clusters of hemlock trees. It was unnaturally quiet in there. No birds, no wind, just dead still. In the middle of the hollow stood what looked like a stone totem, 3 flat, moss-covered rocks stacked with strange care. On top of it, something was hanging, a small animal skull, tied in place with what looked like hair. I backed out of that hollow faster than I cared to admit. I didn't even stop for water. That night, I camped farther up the ridge. No fire, no hammock, just a sleeping bag against a mossy log where I could stay low and hidden. I didn't sleep. Not really. Not close, but not far either. Every now and then it would stop, go quiet for long stretches. Then I'd hear it again. The worst part, It never sounded like it was retreating, just watching, circling, testing. I clutched my knife in one hand, bear spray in the other. Neither made me feel better. When dawn finally came, the forest was still, but when I looked down the ridge toward the path I'd come from, I saw something. Scattered in a circle around the base of the tree I'd slept near were bones. Small ones, rabbits, squirrels, maybe a raccoon. Cleaned, picked bare, arranged in a perfect ring. That's when I broke. I packed up in 10 minutes and hiked for hours without stopping, cutting off the trail and bushwhacking in a straight line toward the nearest road I knew about. I didn't eat, didn't drink, didn't rest. I just moved. Late that afternoon, I stumbled across an old fence line, followed it until it met a gravel fire road, and finally made it back to my truck near dusk. I've never gone back. I tried looking up the hollow online, asked around some forums, and reached out to a couple locals who knew the ridge. One old-timer told me I must have wandered into one of them thinned spots. When I asked what that meant, he just said, places where the veil's thinner than it ought to be. You see things. Sometimes they see you back. I haven't camped alone since. I still love the forest, but I carry more than bear spray now. And sometimes when I'm on a familiar trail and the wind dies all at once, when the birds go quiet, when the air feels suddenly wrong, I turn around because I know now some things walk this earth that don't leave footprints, but they remember yours. I wasn't looking for anything when I found Black Hollow. I was just trying to get away from everything work stress, bills piling up, the death of my dog 2 weeks prior. I needed the silence. So I drove into southern West Virginia, way past the marked trails, into one of the quietest places I could find on the map. The forest there was ancient. Steep ridgelines blanketed in pine, shadowy hollows filled with hemlock, and thick patches of rhododendron. No cell service, no road noise, no signs of human presence. Just the chirp of cicadas and the occasional rustle of deer. Perfect. I parked at an old turnout near a hunting access road, hoisted my pack, and followed a barely visible game trail down into a shaded valley that locals called Black Hollow. I'd only heard of it once, years ago in a bar. Some old guy said his uncle wouldn't even hunt near there, called it cursed land, said even the animals avoided it. I thought it was just superstition. By the time I made camp near the creek at the bottom of the hollow, the sun was already dipping below the ridge. I strung up my tarp between 2 spruce trees, made a small fire, and boiled water for some freeze-dried chili. The first night was quiet, eerily so. I slept light. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the fire still glowing dimly, and the unmistakable sound of sticks breaking somewhere uphill. I sat up slowly, listening. No breeze, no bugs, just complete stillness followed by a slow, heavy step. Then another, and another. My heart kicked up in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the ridge, but the beam barely pierced the dense brush beyond my camp. Whatever it was, it stopped moving. I stood there in my boots and thermals, holding my breath, listening for any sign of it again. But nothing. Eventually, I crawled back under the tarp, knife in hand, and waited for dawn. The next day, I hiked higher up the ridge to try and clear my head. At the top, I found something I didn't expect: stone mounds. 4 of them, about waist-high, shaped like graves, old, half-sunk into the dirt and moss. No markers, no sign of tools, just rough stones stacked by hand. That should have been enough to make me pack up, but it wasn't. Back at camp that evening, I felt off, like something was watching me again. I tried to shake it, cooked my meal, then sat by the fire with my back to the creek. But the longer I stayed still, the more I noticed it, the silence. And then the scream. It came from just beyond the firelight. High-pitched, ragged, not an animal, not a person, something in between. I leapt to my feet, flashlight already in hand, scanned the woods. Nothing. Then a shape moved at the edge of my vision, tall, maybe 7 feet, but hunched and moving strangely, like its joints didn't work the way they should. I shouted, "Hey, who's out there?" No answer, no movement, just silence again. I threw dirt on the fire, grabbed my pack, and climbed the ridge. No way I was spending another night down there. I hiked fast, cutting through the brush with my knife when I had to. I didn't stop until I reached a small, mossy outcrop where I could camp with a view of the trail back out. But the second night was worse. Around midnight I heard whispering, not in English, not in any language I recognized. It came from the trees just downhill. Dozens of voices all murmuring at once, overlapping in a low, choking rhythm, like wind through dying throats. I froze in my sleeping bag, the whispering growing louder and closer. Then it stopped, all at once, and something breathed in, right behind my head. I lunged out of the bag, flashlight sweeping behind me. Nothing, just rocks and shadows. But when I turned to look uphill toward where the trail should have been, there it was, something tall and pale, crouched in the middle of the trail. Its skin was stretched thin over sharp bones. Its head was too narrow, with 2 sunken black holes where its eyes should have been, and it was just watching me. I stepped back. It didn't move. Then it tilted its head and whispered my name. I ran. No gear, no pack, no flashlight. I don't remember getting back to the truck. I don't remember the drive. I just remember the look on the gas station clerk's face when I stumbled in barefoot, shaking, covered in scrapes, asking to use the phone. He said I looked like I'd seen the devil. I think maybe I did. It's been 6 months. I haven't gone back. Haven't told anyone except for this. But sometimes at night, when it gets really still, I hear whispering again. And sometimes I wake up to footprints on my porch. Bare, long-toed, and still wet with creek water. I never used to be afraid of silence. In fact, I craved it. I worked as a wildlife surveyor for the better part of a decade, moving from state to state, spending weeks at a time deep in the backcountry logging animal sightings, migration patterns, and any signs of disease in the herds. Solitude was part of the job. For most of my life it was welcome, but that was before Montana, before the Bitterroot Range, before the week that shattered something in me. I had been sent out in early February, tasked with tracking elk and moose populations in a remote stretch of wilderness near the Idaho border. My agency provided me with a snowmobile satellite beacon and enough rations for 10 days. The cabin I was staying in was a small research outpost, no power, no signal, just 4 walls and a tin roof already half buried in snow. It was isolated, rough, absolutely stunning. On day 1, I unpacked, logged the GPS coordinates, and went out for a basic sweep. Snow was knee-deep in most places, with drifts up to my waist. The temperature never climbed above 10 degrees. It was beautiful, but brutal, the kind of cold that feels alive pressing in on you from all sides. The first few days were uneventful, tracks here and there, a few distant glimpses of elk herds through the binoculars. Standard stuff. I'd return each night to the cabin, boil some snow for water, eat from a thermal pouch, and try to get some sleep. But by night 4, things changed. That evening, I was logging my notes by headlamp when I heard a knock. Not a knock from inside, a knock on the cabin door. At first, I thought maybe it was a branch shifting under snow, but it came again, a deliberate single knock, then silence. No one was supposed to be out here. The nearest ranger station was a 2-hour snowmobile ride away. I grabbed the flare gun from the wall and slowly approached the door. "Hello?" I called out. My voice cracked. Nothing. I opened the door. Snow drifted in, but there was no one there. No tracks. Just open white. That's when I noticed it, a handprint, right in the middle of the window, pressed into the frost from the outside. It was massive, long-fingered, no gloves. I barely slept that night. The next morning, I found something worse. About 30 yards from the cabin, I saw a strange depression in the snow. Not a footprint, but something circular, wide, deep. Like a single knee had dropped into the snow, over and over again. A dragging line followed it, leading off into the woods. I followed it for about 100 feet, but something about the pattern, it didn't make sense. Whatever made it was moving with an awkward rhythm, stopping every few feet to press into the snow again, like it was crawling. By sunset, the wind had picked up. Snow started falling. I hunkered down, told myself I'd imagined the knocking, or the print was just some collapsed drift. But just after midnight, I heard it again. Knock, knock. 2 this time, slower, heavier. I lay still, barely breathing. Then came the dragging sound, outside the cabin walls. Something scraping along the edge of the building. Then it started whispering. I couldn't make out the words, just a low, breathy voice circling the cabin. Over and over again. Scrape, whisper, knock. When it finally stopped, the silence felt even worse. It was total, as if the world itself had gone still. The next morning I found more prints, not foot shape, just impressions like someone was kneeling in the snow, dragging themselves slowly in circles around the cabin. I followed them again out, past the tree line. That's when I saw the tree. It had something hanging from it. At first, I thought it was an old canvas pack, but as I got closer, I realized it was fur. Elk hide, maybe, sewn crudely into the shape of a cloak, hanging by sinew from a branch 10 feet off the ground. The snow beneath it was stained red. There were no animal remains nearby, no carcass, just the cloak swaying in the wind. I went back to the cabin and locked the door with shaking hands. That night, the whispering came back, but this time it was inside. It started faint from the rafters above my cot, then from the corners of the room, then right beside me. I snapped on my headlamp, no one there, but I saw something. A face in the window, sunken, pale, eyes like frozen marbles. It was watching me from outside, its breath fogging the glass, its mouth moving in silent words I couldn't hear. I fired the flare gun straight through the window. The light exploded across the snow, but the figure was already gone. I didn't sleep after that. I packed at dawn and rode the snowmobile back toward the trailhead, full throttle, not stopping for anything. The air was frigid, the wind cutting through my layers, but I didn't care. About halfway back I saw it again, standing between two trees. That same figure, 7 feet tall, wrapped in fur and bone, its face pale and tight, like it had been dead for years. It didn't move, just watched me ride past. I made it back to the ranger station by noon. I didn't say much, just that something had spooked me out in the woods. They laughed, called me city soft, but I saw the way the old ranger looked at me when I described the whispering. The prince, the face in the glass, he didn't laugh. "You stayed in Black Hollow," he said quietly, "didn't you? That's what they call it. Black Hollow, old Cree land. Said something was left out there a long time ago. Something that walks like a man, but isn't. Something that wears the dead like clothes and whispers with the voices of the people it's taken. I haven't gone back. I left wildlife work altogether after that winter." It was a crisp autumn afternoon when I decided to take a solitary hike through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. The trail was one I'd traversed many times before, winding through towering evergreens and alongside babbling brooks. The serenity of the woods had always been a balm to my restless spirit. As the sun began its descent, casting elongated shadows through the trees, I stumbled upon a path I'd never noticed before. It was narrow and overgrown, almost hidden beneath a blanket of fallen leaves. Curiosity piqued, I decided to follow it, drawn by an inexplicable urge. The path led me deeper into the forest, the canopy above thickening and dimming the remaining daylight. The usual sounds of the woods, the chirping of birds, the rustling of small creatures had faded, replaced by an eerie silence. After what felt like an hour, I emerged into a small clearing. At its center stood an old, dilapidated cabin, its wooden structure weathered and worn by time. Vines crept up its sides, and the windows were grimy, obscuring any view of the interior. A sense of unease settled over me, but my innate curiosity pushed me forward. I approached the cabin, each step accompanied by the crunch of leaves beneath my boots. Reaching the door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, revealing a sliver of darkness within. I hesitated, then gently pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, the sound echoing in the stillness. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the scent of decay. Faint light filtered through the grimy windows, casting murky beams across the room. The cabin appeared abandoned. Furniture lay in disarray, and cobwebs adorned the corners. As I ventured further in, I noticed a series of photographs scattered across a table. Picking one up, I saw it was a black and white image of a family, a man, woman, and 2 children standing in front of the very cabin I was in. Turning over more photos, I noticed something unsettling. In each successive picture, the family appeared more haggard, their expressions shifting from joy to despair. The final photo sent a chill down my spine. The family was absent, and in their place stood a tall, shadowy figure with hollow eyes. A sudden noise from the back room snapped me from my thoughts, a soft, almost imperceptible shuffling. My heart pounded as I debated whether to investigate or flee. Summoning courage, I moved toward the source of the sound. The door to the back room was closed. I placed my hand on the knob, feeling the cold metal beneath my palm. Taking a deep breath, I turned it and pushed the door open. The room was empty, save for a large, ornate mirror standing against the far wall. Its surface was pristine, contrasting sharply with the decay around it. Drawn to it, I stepped closer, my reflection becoming clearer with each step. As I stood before the mirror, an overwhelming sense of dread enveloped me. My reflection began to distort, the features twisting and contorting into a grotesque visage. Paralyzed, I watched as the reflection reached out, its hand emerging from the glass, fingers curling toward me. Breaking free from my stupor, I stumbled backward, crashing into a chair and sending it toppling. The noise seemed to shatter the illusion. When I looked back at the mirror, it reflected only the empty room. Not waiting to uncover more, I turned and fled the cabin, the door slamming shut behind me. I sprinted back through the woods, not daring to look back until I reached the familiar main trail. To this day, I can't explain what I experienced in that cabin. The photographs, the mirror, the oppressive sense of dread, all remain etched in my memory. I've since avoided that hidden path, leaving whatever secrets the cabin holds undisturbed. I wasn't planning to camp. I was just going for a long, lonely hike to clear my head, nothing more. It was mid-October in the Allegheny National Forest, and I figured the crisp air and fading foliage would help me reset. I'd been dealing with some heavy personal stuff, family things, and I needed to disappear for a bit. I packed light, just enough food for a day, a knife, a flashlight, a water filter, and my old military poncho in case the weather turned. I left my car at a gravel pull-off near the Timberline Trail and set off around noon. The forest was quiet, calm, peaceful, in that eerie way only the deep woods can be. It smelled like wet leaves and pine, and the trail was nearly empty. I passed one other person, a man with a massive backpack and headphones, before losing sight of any other humans entirely. I walked for hours. By the time I realized the sun was going down, I was already deep in the backcountry. I'd lost the trail somewhere around mile 6, but I wasn't worried. I had my GPS, a basic map, and more than enough time to hike back in the morning. I found a flat patch of land near a hollow with a half-dried creek bed and decided to bed down there for the night. No tent, just a poncho stretched over a stick and some rocks to make a crude lean-to. I started a small fire, ate a protein bar, and lay back with my pack as a pillow, watching the stars slide into view. Around 10 p.m., the forest went silent. It didn't taper off. It just stopped. The wind, the insects, the rustle of distant critters, gone. I've done a lot of solo hikes and I've experienced plenty of weird silences, but this one felt wrong, heavy, like something was holding its breath. Then I heard the first voice. It was faint, coming from the tree line about 20 yards to my right. At first, I thought maybe a hiker had wandered off trail, but the words were too soft, garbled. "Help, please, I'm cold." It was a woman's voice, high-pitched, but the tone was all wrong, flat, like someone trying to sound panicked and not pulling it off. I sat up, grabbed my flashlight, and shined it in the direction of the voice. Nothing, just trees. "Who's there?" I called. "Are you hurt?" The forest stayed silent. I stood, knife in hand, and scanned the trees. I didn't want to walk into the woods blindly, but if someone was hurt, I couldn't just ignore them either. Then I heard it again, closer this time. "Help. I need help." Only now it wasn't the same voice. It was mine. It was my voice. Exact cadence. Exact inflection. The sound of me yelling from the woods. "Please help me," it said again, this time louder. I turned off the flashlight. Heart pounding. Something was wrong. Horribly wrong. Then the voice changed again. "Ben," it said. That's my name. "Ben, come here." I hadn't told anyone where I was going. Not even my sister, who I usually text when I go off-grid. I just needed to be alone. And whatever was out there knew my name and sounded exactly like me. I backed slowly toward the fire, keeping my eyes on the woods. I crouched, grabbing a few thick sticks and feeding the flames. The fire was small, just meant for warmth and comfort, but I didn't want to be without it now. Then the thing stepped into view. It didn't make a sound. No rustling leaves, no snapping branches. It just appeared between two trees, tall and thin, and almost human, but not quite. Its proportions were off, joints bending wrong. Its skin was grayish, pulled tight over its bones, and its mouth stretched far too wide for its narrow face. But it was the eyes that got me, and they were mine. Same shape, same color, same flicker of cautious fear I had when I looked at my own reflection. It tilted its head and spoke again. "Ben," it said, perfect mimicry of my voice. "It's safe out here." I backed toward the creek bed. I had no plan, just get distance. Get away. But then it started moving. Not walking, gliding. Its legs moved, yes, but it didn't seem to touch the ground. I threw a burning stick at it. It hissed, actually hissed, and vanished behind the trees. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the fire roaring until dawn, and every few minutes I heard it circling. Sometimes it would whisper my name. Sometimes it would mimic the voice of my sister. Sometimes it would cry like a child. It never showed itself again, but I could feel it out there, watching, waiting, At first light, I packed my gear, doused the fire, and started hiking back. I didn't stop. I didn't eat. I didn't even rest. Just walked. I made it back to my car by mid-afternoon. I didn't look back. That was 4 years ago. I haven't been back to that part of the forest since. And every now and then, late at night, I'll hear something outside my house. Just a whisper. Just for a second. Ben, come here. It's safe now. I keep the lights on after that. I don't think it ever really left. And worst of all, I think it learned how to follow me.